Hi, Sam. I'm just going to we're going to give a few more minutes to let some more people jump on, and then I'll turn the floor over to you.
No worries. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining today. I'm just going to ask that you stay on mute through the duration of the program until the end. You can feel free to ask questions at the end live, or you can toss them in the chat throughout if you feel like you might forget. And then also, yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or hold them until the end. And then I will toss it over to Sam, who is going to get you guys some knowledge today on what the food industry might look like come June.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I guess first and foremost, I kind of want to just say thank you for joining me today and taking a moment out of, I know what seems to be in some cases a very trying time for most, especially in the food industry right now. So I kind of wanted to just talk to everyone about, one second, pulling this up now. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Kind of about what the food industry as well as food safety may look like as we start to open up. Some of you that happen to go ahead and that are on the call may know me, but I am the owner of Elite Food Safety Training. My company's been in business for approximately 12 years, and we started out kind of helping and kind of consulting with some of the largest military contractors for public health and bringing kind of to light. So where this kind of comes into focus is we decided that we wanted to kind of bring our food safety knowledge of not only of the contractors in the military segment also, but from the industry, because I also am a member with the Conference of Food Protection, also the National Environment Health Agency, and several other local, state, and federal agencies that kind of have had some conversations recently to discuss what we're going to be faced with as we start to open up, not only here in Illinois, but kind of across the board. And that's kind of where this presentation comes in, because I know with the amount of documentation, the information, misinformation, and everything else that is being put out there by different agencies and organizations, I wanted to kind of bring it back into focus and kind of give everybody the kind of like the greatest hits of what we're going to be dealing with. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, what we know about COVID-19 and food safety. Right now, no current evidence to show COVID-19 can infect food that has led to infection or any transmission. We hear a lot about when we go into the grocery stores, we have to go ahead and wear masks now, at least here in Illinois and several other states, whenever we go into different facilities. And it's primarily not to, because of the actual infection itself, it's to minimize or mitigate the spread to one another, as well as to the packaging if there was to become an incident. So that's kind of why that is, but there's no evidence to show that anybody at this point in time, as of today, has been infected by the COVID-19 because of eating food. The other point that what we know so far also is that typically with a bleach solution, anybody that happens to clean any type of either office space or food industry, restaurant, or whatever it might be, typically is running a bleach sanitation level of 100 parts per million, so that it can kind of sanitize any type of contact surfaces that are coming into contact with that. And so when we have to go ahead and do that, the CDC has now put out a guideline that has also been adopted within the military public health and across many different states and organizations, that a bleach solution of 1,000 parts per million will most definitely kill the COVID-19 virus. You know, and just as a side note, at 1,000 parts per million for a bleach concentration, it will kill anything. So what I would highly recommend is when you're actually making contact with this type of concentration level, is that you wear gloves, wear eye protective wear, so that you as well as your staff can remain safe when using this as we start to kind of open, you know, because we're going to want to go ahead, and if this hopefully will go ahead and stay in place on June 1st so we can reopen, a lot of restaurants have already started to kind of clean up, sweep up, dust things off, and kind of get into the actual position of wanting to go ahead and reopen, which I truly hope, you know, across the board it does. So we also happen to have here current proactive food safety practices reduces the transmission factor between customers and staff. I mean, that goes without saying. You know, one of the big things that has been talked about in the news, whether it be the media or whether it be in articles that are being written by the industry, is that hand washing is the biggest transmission factor when it comes to this COVID-19 and how it spreads, along with obviously the transmission of saliva droplets and everything else. But you know, that's one of the biggest pieces. So is providing good food safety practices in your establishment as well as your home and when you're out and about will help with the mitigation of hopefully this COVID-19. It just kind of goes away. We're hoping, kind of like the SARS things did, but time will tell, I guess. The COVID-19 virus does not survive on surfaces for weeks when proactive food safety, cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting procedures are in place. Now, I want to kind of just take just a moment to kind of talk about these three components when it comes to food safety practice. You know, if you're ever in a restaurant or even at home, you happen to hear, you know, make sure that we're cleaning up, make sure that everything's getting sanitized, but not too often do we hear the word disinfect. So just to kind of, for those that happen to have a food safety background and those that are wanting to kind of get some information today, cleaning is the actual removal of all physical debris on a contact surface. Sanitizing is reducing levels of pathogens, microorganisms, to safe levels. Now, disinfecting, that allows for complete elimination of anything that's on that contact surface. However, we all know that nothing's perfect. So when you actually immediately after, if you were to do even a swab test after disinfecting, you would still be at a sanitary level of about 99.9999. I guess pick how many nines you want, but would still be at a point where it would be almost completely eliminated of any type of more microorganisms or pathogens. Then we kind of talk about prevention measures during the reopening, because a lot of people that happen to have office, medical buildings, rehabilitation centers, restaurants, you name it, any place that was going to have customers walking through the door, or where you're going to have staff sitting behind a desk or walking the floor serving your customers, it's going to be imperative that you take every proactive precaution that you can to go ahead and make sure that not only you, your staff, and most importantly, your customers are safe. And that's kind of where this comes in. Is thoroughly clean and disinfect the entire facility, especially if it's been closed for any amount of time. That's one of the things that people want to go ahead and make sure that when they walk into the facility, whether it be now with the COVID-19 situation or even before, you want to walk into an establishment that's been well cleaned, disinfected, cleaned. So that's always imperative. Review and assess HACCP procedures with management. For those that do not happen to have a HACCP in place, a HACCP is a hazard analysis critical control point guidelines that allows for your establishment to pinpoint the gaps in your food safety practices or the flow of the food, so that you can take extra precautionary measures to mitigate that risk, not only to you, your staff, but also to your customers. So if anybody happens to need to know more about that, you can always reach out to us after this presentation, and we can definitely speak with you. Review and assess all job aids and training manuals. Now, the training manuals and the job aids that probably were in place for your establishment will probably still continue to be very effective. However, it would be my recommendation that you go back and definitely look at that and see if there's some type of revision that needs to be made in order to go ahead to help with the current situation that we're all kind of facing right now. Because the last thing that anybody wants, any of us need, is to actually reopen and have something go wrong. So the more preventative measures we can take, the better off all of us are going to be. We talk about also maintaining social distancing with staff and wear appropriate protective face masks. Something I want to go ahead and kind of take a moment and talk about. Many of us happen to use different types of face masks for everything from painting to cleaning to now this COVID-19. My, again, recommendation is that when you start to open your facility back up, please make sure that you talk to your PPE distributor, vendor, provider to get the appropriate mask for your industry, because different masks provide preventative and protective measures for different things, whether it be painting, whether it be the food industry. So please make sure that you're getting the appropriate mask and using those accordingly. The last point here on this slide was to create or update staff illness logs and reports. Document. Now, the reason why I happen to go ahead and kind of made that uppercase is because we want to go ahead and make sure that all documentation is being provided, so that in the future, because with the way that things are starting, which we'll talk about here in a minute, the way things are perceived or may happen to start rolling out with public health inspectors is that they're going to be requiring and requesting a lot more documentation of your facility, staff, operations than they have in the past. So If you happen to have or have not taken a look at what type of documentation you have in the way of illness logs, illness reports, operations, or anything of that nature, it may be a very good idea for you to go ahead and circle back around to go ahead and review those documents as well. And if you need assistance in creating something like that, or need us to come and consult, we will be more than happy to do that for you as well. Just reach out to us, and we'll definitely go ahead and be able to assist in any way that we possibly can. Modified food safety practices. Now, here's some of the information. This is where the new normal starts to come in. A lot of discussion, serious discussion, real discussions actually started where we happen to have restaurateurs, public officials, local, restaurateurs. We happen to have some that are at the state and local government level, some that are actually in the Conference of Food Protection, where they have discussed different topics. And this is kind of where we start with this, is, documenting staff training logs. There's been, I can speak for myself when I actually have been consulted to take a look at operations and help improve on those operations, that this is probably one of the biggest points that I make to the restaurant owner or the facility owner, is that there's no documentation regarding staff training. As far as keeping a log as to valid serve-safe food handler cards or copies of them, certificates, certifications, so that if and when somebody was to ask for that information or a copy of that information, you would have it readily available. In some cases, some restaurateurs have to put them in frames and hang them on the wall. Some keep them in a 3-ring binder. But whatever it is that you do that's convenient for you and your establishment, make sure that you happen to maintain good training logs. Monthly or quarterly refresher training. Typically, with the businesses that we work with, we highly recommend doing refresher training with your staff. Also with yourself. We actually do provide that, and we also happen to go ahead and actually train management to go ahead and be able to provide those trainings as well, so that they can do upkeep training. And because it really comes down to, if you don't use it, you lose it. And you'd be surprised how many people across the board that have taken our classes in the past, after 3 months or 6 months, have kind of gone back and fallen back into old behaviors. So it would be imperative, especially in this environment that we're now dealing with, to do regular refresher trainings with your staff. Also, one of the things that is being talked about and possibly may be adopted by the public health in the retail or restaurant industry, that is already taking place within the military segment for public health, is that the demonstration of food safety knowledge by staff. Where public health inspectors may happen to come in and request a staff member or even yourself to provide a demonstration, a live demonstration of how to properly wash your hands. So that might be something that's coming down and may be implemented and adopted as we start to kind of move forward with this. So that's just one aspect. There's probably going to be a few others that they are now also talking about, but that is the biggest one that they're looking at right now, and as far as being the most relevant to the current situation when it comes to the COVID-19 situation. Regular uniform inspections of staff. I was, to be honest with you, on a side note, I was reading several articles today that when it came to food industry, when it ties into the retail segment, that we happen to go ahead and see that there are fitting rooms, retailers that will no longer allow you to go ahead and try on or go into fitting rooms to try on shirts, men's shirts, women's shirts, or just clothing in general. So I'm not sure as to why that is yet. I've had a few phone calls out there, but that may translate into the food industry as well, to where uniforms may have a contributing factor when it comes to the COVID-19 situation that they're going to review and possibly put into effect. So it would be, once again, something for you to look at as a business owner, to regularly do uniform checks of staff, making sure that, you know, that they're clean, they've been maybe not so much pressed, but definitely clean, and they're free of any type of contaminants. Cleaning logs to reflect contact surfaces to be cleaned and sanitized every 3 hours. Typically, it's every 4 hours. However, in this current environment, we want to stay as proactive as we possibly can as business owners. So if we could stay ahead of any type of situation that could arise, it would more than likely be in the best interest of everyone to go ahead and actually start making those minor changes that we kind of talked about when it comes to modified food safety practices to kind of look at. Also, daily facility audits of logs and sanitation. Here's another one where we actually don't happen to necessarily have this being done across the board as much as it should, in my opinion, because some of the consulting that I've done with restaurants don't happen to have either the manpower or the ability to create the appropriate audit and logs and reports that are needed in order to go ahead and do that on a daily basis. So it allows for us to identify areas with employees or in the operations, front end or the back end, to make improvements either on a daily, weekly, or, you know, something that we put kind of on a wish list at some point, but at least it's documented so that we can circle back around to it and make those improvements as needed when we can. But again, also, if it's done daily, it allows us to go ahead and make changes or revisions to the food safety that's in your establishment on the fly, if that happens to come down to a serious enough incident where it has to be, the staff has to be talked to. Okay, what the new normal could look like for restaurants. Now, these are, again, serious conversations, serious teleconferences that I've been on where this information has kind of been thrown around, where we happen to have delivery drivers may need to obtain food handlers cards. You know, that's something that's already being done in parts of California, and also being adopted or being looked at to be adopted by several states. So that delivery drivers, go through a food handler's card class. Now, I'm not talking about ServSafe certification at a manager level, but the very basic food handler's card to allow the driver to have a better understanding of food safety knowledge. So when they're delivering pizzas, or when they're delivering, you know, the Grubhub or the DoorDash folks, so they're actually handling your food that's being delivered with the new no contact situation, as well as, you know, moving forward, it'll give them a better understanding of what needs to be done in order to safely handle your food. Customers may require special food preparation. You know, they may happen to go ahead, kind of like an allergy handling situation. They may request something to where, you know, your food is being prepared with an actual mask on and gloves, or something to that effect. Again, these are all serious questions and discussions that are being talked about right now from every level of food safety within our industry right now. Also, tables of space apart, a minimum of 6 feet, you know, which for some restaurant owners, that might be a huge problem, because depending how your establishment is positioned, those tables may be in closer proximity than 6 feet. So I know that in some states, like Louisiana, that is actually being a very serious consideration, to where public health officials, when they come in and do inspections, will actually bring a tape measure with them to actually measure out how the distance between tables. I don't know at this point too many other states that are looking to adopt that, but that has been also talked about in the state of Illinois. Not sure where that's going to go, what that looks like, but this is something that is being talked about. Also, reservations made in 2-hour intervals that will allow for complete disinfection between seatings. So I like to use the example with some of the restaurant owners I've already talked about. and talk to, is that it would, if they were to start their dinner service at 4 o'clock, they would have from 4 to 6, and the customers, and then try and go ahead and ask the customers to kind of go through their dinner experience, and then allow for 15 to 30 minutes in between the next seating period to completely clean, sanitize, and disinfect the seats, the tabletops, or anything else that may need to have that done. So again, that might actually play a big factor in the cost of food, labor, and all of these things that are being looked at right now within the food industry. Clean and sanitize reusable menus. That goes without saying. You know, then we happen to go ahead and look at discard menus after each customer use. You know, depending on what you're printing them on, and you know, and how many you're printing, that could become very cost effective. You know, very costly for restaurant owners. Now here's one that the next one, I'm not quite sure how that's going to look, but make hand sanitizer readily available for guests. Not sure how that's going to look or how that's going to play out if that gets adopted, but that is something that restaurants are looking at, as well as the food industry. I know that the National Restaurant Association has talked about that, and that's something that may be coming. Restaurant transition to menus only viewable on personal cell devices. Now, that one's being seriously considered so that it allows for a cost-effective situation for business owners if they have to go to adopt some of these other type of practices. So that when you walk into a restaurant, you're only able to view their menu on a cellular device, whether it be an iPhone, Android, iPad, something to that effect. So this way, also it allows for the minimization of the spread of any type of virus or anything like that that could be around. The other thing is monitor and manage staff health. That once again, you know, the public health officials are really seriously talking about coming in and being a lot harder on business owners, restaurant owners, about managing their documentation and staff. So that's something that very well could be put into place, not only here in Illinois, but across the board. Also, now, again, this next one, not sure how that one's going to roll out, but no fountain drink machines, which to me, in my opinion, I see the potential for contamination. However, I'm just not sure how that is going to overall affect the food industry, especially if they're removed, or what the alternative is going to be to those fountain drink machines if that is adopted by the states or even at a local level. Glove and face mask used for all restaurant staff. Now, here's something I want to just touch on real quick. Now, the reason why I say that is because that could be something that's coming at the local level and state level for many, only because that they announced for anybody that has family or visits the military bases to go ahead and at the commissary level for the Department of Commissary Agencies. They actually, as of Friday, are adopting a questionnaire to be filled out by every single employee, temperatures taken at the door, and also several other questions that need to be answered before allowing an employee to enter into the facility to help customers. So I'm not sure that the states or the local agencies will go to that degree, but again, those are already conversations that are being discussed right now within the food industry. I'm not sure how that's going to go or where that's going to go, if it goes anywhere, but I just wanted to kind of just put that out there real quick and kind of just give you some food for thought. Now, I'm not sure if we happen to have any questions because I've kind of been with my PowerPoint here, but if anybody has any questions, it looks like we may happen to have a couple minutes. So if we don't, then I just wanted to kind of say thank you to everybody once again for taking time out of your day to join me on this call and kind of go over and give you some food for thought on what we're dealing with when we start to reopen our restaurants in Illinois and across the country. You know, so if you happen to have any questions between now or any time in the future, please, you can visit us on our website, or you can go ahead and contact us by dialing our 800 number. But if there's nothing else, then I would just like to say, you all be safe, stay healthy, and we are here to help you in any way that we can. So
hey, Sam, it looks like we've got a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, sure.
One question was, how do you manage restrooms?
How do we, one more time, please?
Sure. It's how do you manage restrooms?
Restrooms. Great question. Well, the restroom situation would be that if you happen to go ahead and have, say, a hand air dryer, you may want to think about possibly getting that either updated or removing it and replacing it with an actual single hand paper towel machine. Because in many cases, unless those hand dry machines are updated, sanitized, and disinfected on a regular basis, you can imagine what's getting blown onto your hands after you use the facilities. So it would probably be my biggest recommendation to transition to a paper towel kind of setup in your restrooms.
Okay, and another question is, how will this work with catering?
One more time, I'm sorry.
How will this work with catering?
This will happen to go ahead. There are some talks right now at the current level where they will actually have to maintain logs, whether it be temperature logs from the time they leave the facility to the time they arrive. Somebody will actually happen to have what's called a PIC, a person in charge at the facility they're catering at. We'll have to go ahead, check those logs, check the temperatures of the food being brought in, sign off on those logs, and then at that point, maintain appropriate heating or cooling temperatures. So really what that piece of it comes down to is there's going to be a lot more documentation that's probably going to be required as we start to move forward.
If I can ask a question going on this catering thing. So say a business opens and they hire out, say, Empire to do their catering. Who is liable when they bring in the food, they maintain, they have a PIC and they have the food, the temperature log, and their protective gear is all set, right? Who's liable at that point once the food is delivered for anyone consuming or on site? Is there liability to the person who's catering or the company that's catering?
Well, it's twofold. One, if you happen to go ahead and have a member of your staff actually at the catering event to monitor, which is always a good recommendation, to monitor the temperatures and monitor the food itself, that is the responsibility of the person that is actually monitoring the food. So if you were to drop off the food and that is written into your contracting agreement that you were to go ahead and be dropping off the food, you may want to make a revision to your catering contract to state that once that food is dropped off, it is then the responsibility of the facility or said person at that establishment. So that way it takes the liability away from Empire per se in this scenario and puts it onto the facility and or somebody there at that facility.
Great, thank you. That's a great answer.
It looks like there's another question too. How will this work with outdoor seating?
Outdoor seating, again, once the act from, at least for today, things are ever changing, but as of today, the same rules apply that it would with any other eating facility where you were to buy, say for instance, like your sandwich at and I'll use this at a deli, like say for instance a deli, you buy your sandwich in the facility where we know food safety practices and everything is established. You take it outside of the facility, that at that point, that food becomes your responsibility. Great questions.
But the servers who are working the outside space would have to follow the same guidelines for PPE, etc.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Nothing changes because you're outside.
Yes. So you happen to have some frequent glove changing. You happen to have also the mask, social distancing, which even after June 1st, in my opinion, and based on the discussions that I've had, that is going to continue for some time to come. that's not just going to go away on June 1st. Now, I hope it does. But based on everything that I've heard, that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Great. Are there any other last questions?
It looks like there was one more about what sanitation rules for toilets. What are the rules for toilets, I guess, sanitizing?
Those still remain the same. Those still remain the same during cleaning and sanitizing during normal business hours. The one thing that I would make a very strong recommendation for is that in many cases, many restroom facilities that are cleaned and sanitized, that they do not keep appropriate documentation or logs in the restroom or in the facility to let customers know or public health officials know as to when last time those facilities were cleaned and sanitized. So the process and procedures remain the same. I would just strongly implement or recommend that you put logs into place so that people, customers, public health officials can kind of maintain and look at those logs if need be.
Excellent. Last call. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you, Sam, so much for all of this information today. It was really great. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can certainly connect with Sam and his team to get you answers.
Absolutely. And again, once again, everyone, please be safe, stay healthy out there. And thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Hope to see you in some of my classes.